I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
What up, what up? This is your boy Rob Clark, welcoming you to the 22 November Network. Get ready for another exciting edition of the Lone Gunman Podcast, featuring me, that's right, your boy Rob Clark, coming at you. Stay tuned. Be right there. Oh yeah, what's up everybody? Welcome to the show, episode 57 of the Lone Gunman Podcast. This is your boy Rob Clark, and we're going to jump right into it this week. A couple weeks ago, I issued a challenge to any one of the Lone Nut Persuasion to come on the show and have a discussion, because you know, it's easy when you're sitting behind a keyboard to push your ideas out on people and to argue. And, you know, I'm not interested in starting a fight. I merely want to understand. And a brave soul, a guy who I was hoping would volunteer, did. And only one person did, and that man is Steve Roe. And I've known Steve for a couple years now, and I got nothing but respect for Steve. You know, not only does he believe in the lone shooter scenario. You know, he's a researcher. He's been a researcher for a very long time, and as you'll see, you know, this story with Steve turned into something more than I thought it was going to be, and I'm proud of this one, and I got nothing but respect for Steve, and it gives you a little bit of perspective from, you know, not only someone who was around back then, but this happened in his hometown, in his backyard, and how it affected him personally and profoundly. So anyway, enough of me. Enjoy the show, guys. This is me and Steve getting it on. Ring the bell, baby.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Lone Gunman Podcast, episode number 57, I believe. Today I have a very special treat for you and a very special guest, and it's an idea I've been toying with for a little while here, because it's something that you don't normally hear a lot of. But today my guest is Mr. Steve Roe from California. How you doing, Steve?
Hi, Rob. How you doing, man? Long time no see.
I'm doing good, buddy. I'm doing good. And the reason I wanted to talk to Steve today is because for people that aren't familiar with Steve on Facebook and whatever forums you're a part of there, Steve believes in, well, he's a lone nut. Let's get right down to it. And I feel like that's a derogatory term, Steve. What would a better term be?
Well, that's the common term. I personally, I'm not offended by it. I'm more of a long shooter type guy, but anyway, it's the same thing.
Yeah, and it's bad to put labels on people like that, and on both sides, really, because, as you know, there's a lot of nuts on our side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're not without nuts ourselves, so.
Yeah, and those guys, they're the bad apples of the bunch. They give both sides of our stuff bad names. And the reason I wanted to have you on in particular, and I'm glad you volunteered to come on, and is because we actually get along quite well. We've collaborated on a little research in the past. And why don't you go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in the case and what brought you to where you are today, Steve?
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Rob, for the opportunity. That speaks volumes for you. As you said, we knew each other for, 2-3 years now. We have collaborated, but anyway, I'll just get into myself a little bit, where I come from on the JFK case. I'm originally from Dallas. Actually, I was born in Michigan of all places, but our family moved to Dallas about 1 year after I was born. But anyway, I grew up in Dallas. I have 2 uncles and families over there. Well, they're not living anymore, but part of my cousins lived in Oak Cliff. I spent a lot of time in Oak Cliff in the late 50s, early 60s there. Visiting my cousins are over there, so a lot of the places that are in the JFK thing I'm very familiar with. But anyway, getting back, how I got impacted by this was. I was 8 years old when Kennedy was shot. I was basically in elementary school. My mother worked at Parkland Hospital.
Oh, wow.
She was a registered nurse, but she was only working part-time. My dad had a full-time job there as well. But anyway, I remember that day. It's kind of etched in your brain when it happened, especially in your hometown. I was at school, elementary school there, and we were out for recess. And I was out on the playground playing with the other kids, I'm sure. And one of the teachers came out to the playground and started herding the kids back inside the school. And, of course, the shots were 12:30. I can't recall the time on it. Being 8 years old, I don't have total recall. But they rounded us up, and they gathered everybody into a little room called the film room. And back in those days, the film room was when they used to show those old black and white goofy pictures about, whatever,
Yeah, when the projector was too big to move around from class to class.
Yeah, exactly. But also in that film room, they had 2 big old clunker TVs that were set up on a kind of a stand. It had wheels on it and roll around.
Right.
So they herded us into that room. I don't know. There's, probably 50 of us in there, probably. And they had the TV on. And there was a rumor going around right when we were getting herded in about the president getting shot. And, wow, these kids, they can't really understand the gravity of it, but it's pretty shocking to hear that.
Right.
So, anyway, they had the TV on. I can't remember what TV station we were watching. Channel 8, probably. There was 4 local TV networks over at that time, just 4. Anyway, they had the coverage on, and they probably had Jay Watson on there on WFAA. I don't recall that, but anyway, there was a few teachers. There was probably 4 or 5 teachers in there, and a couple of them were crying. And then they made the announcement that the president was shot. And I remember this because, of course, there was people that were kind of shocked as kids, but also remember a few boys cheering.
Really?
You know? Yeah, I mean, there's, oh yeah, you know, right. So that kind of, you know, it left a little bad taste in my mouth, you know. I mean, anybody getting shot is a bad thing. So anyway, I'll cut this down a little bit, but anyway, they had us in there for a while. Then they didn't know what to do with us. So anyway, they rounded us, all of us kids in that school, to the big auditorium there, and they had the TV going up there as well. And they rounded a bunch of buses up, and I used to catch the bus to school every day. And so we boarded these buses and went home. Of course, there was mothers and family members picking up kids all left and right there, you know.
Yeah.
So I got on the bus and rode back to our little house there in Dallas, just north of Love Field, and got off the bus, and I came inside the house. My mother was off that day, and found my mother crying. She had the TV going, so of course she was pretty traumatized by it too, I guess, and everybody was, really, in some way or the other. So that was kind of a, you know, it's something that's etched in your brain, you know. And yeah, it was you know, I guess it'd be like a 9/11, you know, but it seemed that the whole world just stood still at that point. And then my dad got home from work later on that day. I actually got the original Dallas Times-Herald that was thrown in our driveway on that day. I still have that.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah, it's a first edition. That's one that came out. Times-Herald was the afternoon edition paper, and the Dallas Morning News was the morning one, you know.
Right.
Dallas Morning News was more conservative, had a more conservative bent to it, you know, and the Times-Herald was, I guess you could classify it as a little more liberal bent. Anyway, my parents loved the Times-Herald. They didn't like the Dallas Morning News. But anyway, I still have that, and actually I have another copy. I think my dad probably got that from work. But I have two copies of it. So we were, of course, pretty much transfixed to the TV. I remember my mother talking to people on the telephone, probably my aunt.
Right.
And then I remember her talking to some nurses off and on during the weekend there, you know.
Right.
My mother was a nurse, and she worked in the like a maternity ward. But she would deal with the premature babies, you know. She was in those incubators and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, like the NICU.
Yeah, like that. And then, so she went to work, I think, Monday. But the one thing I really regret from this time is I wish I had talked to her more about it, you know.
Yeah.
Because she knew those doctors. She did tell me that the president was DOA, and that was her friends telling her that. And she may have went over and saw Connolly, and you know, when he was over there. But
right.
She did tell me that the Governor Connolly was a big crybaby. You know, kind of demanding guy, you know, but he was kind of a crybaby. I don't know where she got that from. I think the other nurses or something, but
He should have been thanking his lucky stars.
Yeah, so anyway. So, Sunday, we were attending a little church on Industrial Boulevard just north of Commerce. It's just a small congregation, Church of Christ. My family had splintered off from another church over there in Oak Cliff and started their own. You know, they were gathering money to build a church, and so we were in this little, it's kind of a carpenter's union hall, if I remember correctly. Just a place we rented every week for church service, you know.
Right.
So anyway, we were in there, and of course the big buzz was the assassination, and there were some words told about the president. But anyway, one of the members of that church, I can't recall who, but anyway, came in or went outside to smoke a cigarette or something, but mentioned that Oswald got shot. And of course, everybody back in those days was glued to their radios, you know, transistor radios, car radios. So everybody kind of went outside, went to their cars, and got in there and, you know, cranked it up, turned on the radio, and listening to this, you know. And I recall right there on Industrial Boulevard seeing cop cars race up past us, and there's some sirens going on.
Oh, wow.
And they were obviously heading up to Parkland Hospital,
right,
with, you know, to cover Oswald up there. But anyway, all this kind of just etched into my mind, you know. I think during that weekend we actually went down tried to go look at that Texas School Book Depository with my uncle. Drove us down there. We couldn't get close. It was all packed with people, cars, and traffic was just jammed up. We never did really get to drive on Elm Street. I think we were on Pacific or something. I don't know. But anyway, all these things, you know, kind of have in your mind. So that's kind of where I got started. And then as I got a little older, you know, it always kind of interested me, you know, when I was getting in my teen years, to go down to the library and start reading books. So I can't recall all the books I read or who it was. You know, I'm sure I read Mark Lane's and I don't know, Whitewash. I think I remember that one.
Maybe some Epstein.
Yeah, could have. Yeah, to be honest with you, I just really can't recall it exactly. But I mean, I don't know. I'm talking about 10 books or so. You know.
Yeah, these are early critics, you know, of the Warren Report.
Exactly. I do remember listening to the transistor radio as a kid, and after all this happened, my dad had a little cheap Japanese transistor radio that I loved to listen to, you know, rock music at night and in bed, you know, with an earphone.
Mm.
Yeah. So I listened to that, some of those call-in shows like Russ Knight, Weird Beard, KLIF, and they were talking about the whole thing, you know. But that was one thing I do remember. People were calling in and say they saw Oswald at the Western Auto. They saw him at a gas station. Oh, yeah, I saw Jack Ruby. You know, there's all kinds of calls like that.
Oh, yeah.
Going in there, you know. So it was kind of a strange occurrence. But what I can tell you of that time, when it happened, nobody knew what was going on. But the first thing, whenever they got Oswald, they found out he was a supposed Marxist or communist, was, oh my God, this is a Russian deal, right? So, when the year before, we just got through the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know. So, I mean, there was a buzz about that. Oh my God, are we going to be in a war here? You know, are they going to be shooting the nukes off Cuba at us? Or, you know, there was a lot of that talk.
Yeah.
A lot. Anyway, getting back on up there. So anyway, I kind of held an interest in it during my teen years, and then in my 20s I went on and you know, occasionally read a book, you know, but I always held that, yeah, there's something to this, you know, there's a conspiracy. I mean, all these people writing these things and, you know, didn't add up, you know.
Yeah.
So, of course, the Warren Report came out in I believe it's September '64. When that came out, Walter Cronkite, he's in a famous little TV show there. I think it was 3 or 4 hours where he got on the air explaining it, you know, to everybody. But as far as I know, nobody really bought had money to buy 27 volumes of the Warren Report,
Right.
and that was for fancy lawyers and people that smoke pipes and sit around in smoking jackets all day,
And I think,
So-
and I think one thing we can agree on is, even if we don't agree with the conclusion of the Warren Report, we can agree that they probably went about putting all that together in a not really so coherent kind of way. I mean, it was confusing for a lot of people to even understand what the hell they were trying to say in it.
I agree with that. Absolutely. I mean, it wasn't really well organized. It's just a big data dump,
Yeah.
Now, they had a concluding volume, which I read later. I have a copy of that, but that kind of makes sense. But, who in the world's got all this time to read all this stuff, So, but I recall there was a lot of people that did not believe it, Of course, the media was on it, and they agreed with it. But, so anyway, that's where it stood. And then, of course, all the series of books came out later. And then, I kind of lost interest in it for about 20 years. And then, I'm going to fast forward just a little bit. Then I got up, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago. I did read one book, Case Closed. That was back in the 90s.
Right.
And that kind of neutralized me. I said, well, Posner's got a deal, but I wasn't completely sold. Well, there's got to be something to it. So, about 10 years ago, I decided, about 7 or 8 years ago, me and my wife took a trip back to Dallas, where my sister still lives. And my wife had never been to the Texas School Book Depository. And I hadn't, for many years, being out here in California, since they opened the 6th floor museum. So I talked my sister into taking us down there, and we took the tour of the 6th floor museum. So we saw all exhibits, went through it, and worked ourselves up to the 6th floor. Of course, they had the sniper's nest all plexiglassed off. You couldn't get in there.
Right.
And so I stood right next to the window, adjacent to that sniper's nest, and looked down on Elm. And that's what turned me right there. I looked right down there on Elm Street, trying to visualize the shots,
Yeah.
And I said, wait a minute. This is close. This is not, we're not talking great distances here. And
Yeah,
I thought to
it's a
myself,
lot shorter
my
than what
God.
people think it is.
Yeah, I think the first shot was 57 yards, diagonal, and the last shot was 88 yards, I believe.
Yeah.
So I'm looking down this thing out the window, and I'm visualizing it, and I said, wait a minute. I said, this is close. This is really close. And anyway, it just kind of stunned me, and I said, well, I'm going to start rethinking this a little bit. But, we got out, and then I walked around out in the plaza, and then went behind the stockade fence. And I said, well, let me see if I can line this shot up, And I stood behind the stockade fence many places there. I said, no, there's no way. I said, first of all, the angle doesn't work. And it's so close to the Elm Street there, If somebody did shoot, how in the world did didn't notice it,
Right.
So anyway, all these things kind of added up in my mind, and I said, I'm going to rethink this, And but this time I'm not going to read books. I'm going to do my own research, draw my own conclusions. I did read 3 books in the last year, one of them being Gail Jackson's book. It's a good book. I like that book.
Yeah.
Franklin Griffin, read his book. What's the other one there? Franklin Griffin was Touched by Fire.
Yeah, I haven't read that one.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. He's got an interesting story, just from a personal story standpoint. And, what's the other one? I forgot. But anyway, for the most part, I decided to do the research myself and get back into it, and then start working through the Mary Farrell side, looking at these things. Anyway, I'm gonna kind of sum this up a little quicker, but I thought I started investigating this and said, well, how do you approach this? This is such a massive thing. Even the Mary Farrell side, you go to that, and that's just a big data dump, and where do you go, Where do you start?
Yeah,
so
you almost have to know what you're looking for, exactly.
Yeah, I poked around, I want to learn about J.D. Tippett and, and this and that. And anyway, I kind of built up all these reference sites I get into, but then I finally come to the conclusion, the best thing to do is to treat it like a homicide. Start there, okay? Start from ground zero, where it happened, and all this stuff.
Right.
And instead of hopscotching over to CIA and Mexico, start from there. So that's what I did, and I changed my thinking after looking at a lot of this stuff. On the forums, but on the Facebook deal, I kind of ran across that JFK thing by accident, and then I got to getting on there, and that's where I met you.
Yeah.
And we had some interesting conversations too, good ones too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so there's a whole, this whole community, and you get to start familiarizing all these people, and of course there's every theory known to man in there,
Yeah.
and to the ridiculous to pretty good ones, but so I got involved with that, and I was trying to learn, and then I got into the argument phase of it, and stuff like that, but that's how I got started, basically.
Well, let me ask you this, because I know, a lot of people don't understand how much of an, fear of communism people were living under back then, and a lot of people, held the sentiment that Kennedy was too soft on communism. He wanted to buddy up with the Russians. He didn't do anything about Cuba, and that did piss a lot of people off. And I'm sure some of those kids that were in your class clapping were just echoing what they had heard from their parents. Speak ill of Kennedy and his lack of strength, against communism and doing nothing against Cuba.
Yes.
You got this communist nation 60 miles off of our shore, and he's not doing anything about it. We got nukes, right off of our shore, and he's not doing anything about it. He's trying to form a friendship with Khrushchev, and that made people very wary of him. So that there was a big anti-Kennedy bias going on back then as well, too.
Well, that's a great point you bring up, and it's exactly right. In Dallas, I can tell you that for sure. Kennedy, for the most part, there was, I think, a lot of people. It's been misrepresented in Dallas, but as you can tell, there's all the people that turned out for the motorcade by the thousands, in Dallas. Were I think the majority liked Kennedy.
Right.
And back in those days, Jack and Jackie were rock stars. They were, they were very charismatic people, handsome and beautiful. Jackie had her beautiful clothes, designer clothes. It was a real big departure from Eisenhower and Truman and, of course, FDR.
Yeah.
So, and he was a young guy, but in Dallas, there was a vocal minority, very right-wing, John Birchers,
Oh yeah.
states' rights. There was a whole conflagration of these people, very vocal. I mean, and then there was a strong sentiment, yes, that Kennedy was, well, he was soft.
Right.
I mean, he wasn't Eisenhower. I mean, he wasn't going to go crush these commies that are 90 miles off our shores, you know. I mean, that you lack the will or whatever, you know. There was a lot of talk like that. And a lot of people held that sentiment in Dallas.
Well, not just in Dallas either, Steve. I mean, you had it in New Orleans, you had it in Florida, you had it in Georgia. You know, a lot of the South felt that way.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. But also that you had in the background, too, you had the civil rights coming in. Kennedy was a big proponent of that, and the South was fighting that pretty hard. It was more of a federal government over the states, you know. So we had a lot of these states' rightists, you know. And then you had all these white citizen councils all over throughout the South, you know, fighting this with the forced integration of Earl Warren Court, you know. So in 1956, Dallas chose the rural structure. They didn't integrate the schools right away. They kind of held off on it. So all these things kind of added up towards Kennedy, and you know, there was some very vocal people there, you know, and that was witnessed by the Adlai Stevenson deal.
Yeah.
If you recall that, Adlai Stevenson came in there for, I think it's October 24th of 63 to give a speech on what they call United Nations Day. And the night before, General Walker held a U.S. Day rally, which General Walker was you know, a real character. I mean, I could go hours about him. But anyway, long story short, there, you know, Walker worked up all his. He held the same rally in the Dallas Memorial Auditorium the day before, and oddly enough, Oswald was there.
Right.
So, and then the next night, Stevenson gave his speech, but he was booed and all this other stuff, and then he was, you know, spit on and got hit over the head with a placard by a lady there, you know. Anyway, it just left a bad stain on Dallas. Of course, they hit the national news and everything like that, and I mean, Stevenson got out of there just barely alive, you know.
Right.
In fact, he was in the car with Stanley Marcus, which Stanley Marcus of Neiman Marcus fame had put that UN Day rally together, but for Stevenson, but they had to race, almost plow out of that crowd, running over people, getting out of there. So anyway, so you had this image of Dallas there, right? And you know, look at these nuts down there, you know, and these animals, you know, and all this stuff. So that was in the background too.
Right. And now the question becomes then, Steve, did Oswald feel so strongly, you know, the same way? Did he echo these sentiments of these people, these extreme right-wingers, to where his hatred of Kennedy and his policies was strong enough for him to do what he was accused of doing, to throw his life away, to throw his family away, for just to, you know, to get rid of Kennedy? It's one of those things that you think about and you ponder on, and you try to put yourself in his shoes, and it's a hard thing to do, and it's a hard conclusion to get to, because, you know, there's so, I guess, few supporting bits of evidence that would lead you to believe that Oswald had that strong of an anti-Kennedy sentiment.
Yeah, that's a fair question. That's one I struggled with a lot. What was the motivation to kill Kennedy?
Right.
Well, and it is a hard. I admit that. Where does this come from? Because in my mind, you have to link the Walker shooting with the Kennedy. So anyway, Oswald, everything I can determine, and I've read in some of his writings and whatever, his diary and stuff like that, he was vehemently opposed to General Walker. So, Oswald's more of a left-lean type of guy. I mean, he believed in civil rights, but so I struggled with this for a long time. Why is he up there shooting the president? And of course, I've kind of looked back at people that conversed with him over the years. Where did this come from? But he did make some anti-Kennedy statements. In fact, it was to what's that guy? Smith, the German, Volkmar Smith. He was part of that white Russian community over there.
Right.
And anyway, they attended a kind of a house party over there, and Des Moines introduced him to all these guys, and anyway, Oswald was railing on about Kennedy and the Cuba thing. And I think that was part of the motivation. Here was Kennedy wanting to basically crush, overthrow, whatever, Castro. And there's no doubt in my mind. I've looked at this pretty intensely, and I said, well, Oswald did idolize Castro. He did. There's no doubt in my mind. I've looked at it. In fact, in New Orleans, his uncle, Dutch Murray, went in there to his house on Magazine Street, and there was a picture of Castro over the mantle.
Right.
So, and you read Marina. I know people don't trust her, but I think she's a victim myself. But
at that time, Steve, a lot of people were happy about the fact that Castro was overthrowing Batista. They offered support, both verbally and physically. Many Americans did, and they didn't really know what was coming down the pipe as far as Castro is concerned. They were just happy that somebody was raising up and getting rid of Batista, and I think a lot of people did idolize what he was doing down there until he made that unholy alliance with Russia. Then people started changing their minds a little bit on him.
Exactly. And of course, a lot of those adventurers, that went back there and fought with Castro on the American side, Jerry Hemming and the Lauren Halls and those people, were then he turned communist, and then they just felt like they were sold out.
Right.
And that's exactly right. And then the Cuban Missile Crisis comes along, and that was a big deal. I can tell you that. I mean, that was pretty scary. So,
but Oswald was in Russia at the time of the missile crisis, basically. So he wasn't, I guess, in state firsthand to realize, I guess, what the American sentiment was, the American view of things. He would have just been getting the what the Russians told him, basically, over there.
Right. And so he comes waltzing back in the United States in June of '63, and all this is water under the bridge. But anyway, another clue I've looked in is he subscribed to two newspapers, the Militant and the Worker.
Right.
And you go back and you read The Militant, which is a little bit more, how you say, radical. You can read column after column of them lambasting Kennedy and his policy against Cuba. So, anyway, it's really hard to pinpoint down, Rob. I just can't say, all right, well, here it is, he's come out against Kennedy, hated Kennedy, and everything like that. I just don't think it's that cut and dry.
Right.
And that's another part of my research, is trying to see where a motive came from,
Right.
So,
and that's what I like about you, Steve. I mean, you're not like most people that are set in their viewpoints. You're open-minded to things as long as that's where the research goes, and you're still researching. You're still at it. It's not like you've accepted your opinions or your thoughts on the case and they're set in stone. And that's a problem on both sides as well. I mean, you got people on our side that think that Oswald never fired a shot, didn't know what was going on, was totally clueless, totally set up, and he should be put on the mantle with a halo on his head, And
yeah.
I say that because I used to think it, back in the 90s, early 2000s. I thought that he was the genuine patsy, the clueless patsy, and the more I researched, the more my thought process evolved. And, I'm open to whatever, and I'm fairly certain, being who he was associated with in New Orleans and what was going on there, and just his movements in Dallas and who he was associating with there, that he was not a totally clueless patsy, that he probably did, if there was a plot, have knowledge of said plot, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody has all the answers, although some people think that they do. They like to believe in these things that ties a nice little neat bow on it, and they can go on with their lives and the case is solved. But I don't think it's that simple either, Steve.
Well, that's a good point. You really can't. And on the face of it, it bothered me. Here's a guy, he defects to Russia. Was he a defector or what? And then comes back, and then he's handing out all these leaflets. And here's another thing I want to bring up, and part of my research. He was well known for handing out his leaflets over there in New Orleans, but what I've discovered is he was handing them out in Dallas too. High probability. I don't have anything to pin it on no picture of them, but I've got some documentation that kind of leads that way. But he was handing those things out. As far as I know, it was just one time down there on Hervey Street in front of the H.L. Green variety store down there.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah. So that's important to me. I looked at that, and I kind of tie that in. I wrote a little article up. It's way back here somewhere, but for myself. But tying him in with the backyard pictures, and all that stuff, But so there's where I kind of looked at it too. I said, well, is he involved in some type of intelligence outfit down there in New Orleans? What is he doing here? So I think he was doing his own thing, Rob. I wish I had 100% proof that he was handing out that leaflets down there, but I've got some pretty compelling backup evidence of that. In fact, he wrote to, V.T. Lee's outfit down there, Fairplay, Cuba, I think, requesting more leaflets and saying he made up a homemade sign. It was one of those things that drape around his neck, and he was down there in Dallas. That's in his writing. So he was doing that before New Orleans.
Right.
So that's another little clue to look at. But personally, I don't have all the answers. But the more you dig, the more you research it. In my mind, it gets a little bit clearer. It's still a fuzzy picture, but at this point now, I think he was doing his own thing. I don't think he ever had any intelligence connections. I think he was just doing his own dang thing. But I'm hoping that somebody's got it.
Yeah. Well, on that note, why do you think that the CIA and the Warren Commission are so protective of their files? If he did it, if he was a commie, if he did it, just what's the big? Why all the secrecy? And I know they say national security, but it boils down to the killing of a president. And if this guy did it, then why can't we see all the files yet?
Well, that's a valid point. I acknowledge that. Now there's going to be some more files released in 2017. I think these remaining Warren Commission files. That's going to be kind of interesting to look at. And, Mexico troubles me a little more. Yeah. There's a big black hole down there. What was he doing down there? And it's a good point. I acknowledge that, here he is. I mean, why don't you just release everything and show it? I don't have an answer for that. I really don't. But everything I've seen up to this date, since the JFK Act in the early 90s, that was released, that was a gob of stuff,
Oh, yeah.
That's one thing I agree with Oliver Stone on. But, that was very helpful for every researcher. But anyway, that's a good point, Rob. I can log that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not out to change anybody's mind. I'm sure you're not out to change anybody's mind either. I mean, it's when it comes to researching this case, it's a very personal journey, and everybody's at different stages of that journey. And I just hope that people out there listening can understand where both of us are coming from. We both have a lot of questions. Even though we might come to different conclusions, we still have a lot of the same questions. And we're still looking for a lot of the same answers. And I mean, I just speaking for myself, if there comes a document out, hey, we got this guy. If there's a picture that comes out of Oswald sitting up on the 6th floor, then okay, okay, then I'll go with it. And I'm just after the truth, and I'm sure you are too. You want the truth. That's what we're all seeking here in the end. Of course, save for 3/4 of the community out there that are totally completely lunatic, which is frustrating as hell. But
yeah, I understand you. That's exactly right. I think you and I are on kind of a safe wavelength here, but you're approaching from one side, I'm approaching from the other, and maybe Doug Campbell, he's approaching from another, on and on. It is a personal journey. So you have this community. There is a good community of researchers. I can tell you that. But that really look into this stuff. Documents are important. But how you interpret those documents is another thing.
Yeah, and I was even watching this thing about eyewitnesses, Steve, the other day, and how they actually took 12 people. And they had them in a courtroom, and they had them watch a video. And it was probably a 30-second video, and there was a lot of things going on in this video. It was a city scene. There's people walking around, cars going by, people doing things, in the background, foreground. And they showed these 12 people this 30-second clip. And they had them watch it, and then they asked them questions about what they had just watched. And they knew that they were going to be asked questions about what they just watched, ahead of time. They told them, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have you watch this, and then we're going to see how accurate your eyewitness reporting is. So they told him to make sure you pay attention to the details, make sure you take everything in, the whole 9 yards. And after that 30-second video, that woman was up there questioning him, and I was shocked, Steve, and surprised at how many people missed things, got things totally wrong, colors totally wrong, what people were doing totally wrong. And then they showed the video to them again. They said, okay, you watched it once, you thought you saw, you know what you thought you saw. We're going to show it to you again. This time, you know what we're going to be asking, the types of things we're going to be asking. Watch it again, okay? So they showed it to him again. And the second time, they had 2 of the 12 people ahead of time. They got with them and said, we want you to kind of purposely mislead everybody else and be very vocal and very positive about what you saw. And basically see if they could get the other 10 people to agree with them about what they just supposedly saw. I am 100% sure that guy was wearing a gray shirt. I know he was wearing a gray shirt, and the other people would say, oh, yeah, you're right. And it was just amazing to me about how many of these eyewitnesses who just watched this stuff got it wrong. I mean, really, really wrong. It was just crazy. And when you go back to think that all these people in Dealey Plaza didn't know what was coming, okay? They didn't know that they were going to have to recall what they had just watched or what they had just seen. And that's why, it's hard to rely on eyewitness testimony. And I didn't realize how bad it was until I saw this show that was on TV, and I was like, man, that is crazy how wrong people can be about things. And it's even evident going back to the Newman's testimony. He's sitting 10 feet away from the president, and he says, I saw him jump up in his seat, and then he got shot in the head, which we know he didn't jump up in his seat.
No. And that's a great point. Of course, any cop out would tell you that too. One of the worst things is all these people telling different stories of whatever happened, and that's an excellent point. And here's a little experiment, Rob. I'd like to, that dovetails into your last comments here. Let's have a moment of silence for a little bit, okay?
Okay.
And then I'll jump back in. We'll start it right now. Okay, over. That was roughly 10 seconds. I didn't time it with my watch. I just kind of... that was, give or take, the shooting sequence from the first shot to the head shot down on Elm. And so your point is very valid, because when something like that happens, it's unexpected, right? Something totally unexpected. I mean, a shot rings out. Everybody was kind of, turning around looking, what was that, and then, the other 2 shots in such a short time span, and then you get all these other witness testimonies, like Newman talking about standing up in the car. Yeah. So it's totally unreliable. I mean, you can't just pinpoint one guy. I mean, you have to look at it, and you have to try to read between the lines. So it's a valid point. So as a researcher, you have to consider that.
Right. I consider a person's recollection of events, like what they actually did, where they went, more reliable than what they saw or heard. Because, when a gunshot rings out, you're going to have people that immediately know what the hell it is, are going to be like, all right, I need to get to cover, I need to get down. You're going to have people who think it was a firework or it was a joke or, something like that. They're going to be looking around dumbfounded. Then you got people that are just frozen, who don't know what to think, that, they're sent almost into a state of shock. Maybe their system is shutting other functions down, such as hearing, people close their eyes. They don't want to see what's going on. Just a myriad of different things could take place when you're talking about such a vast array of people. And, it was just up until recently, I was just like, I got to throw all this eyewitness testimony out the freaking door, and start putting more credence as to what people did. This is what I did, rather than this is what I saw. And I think it'll be, things get a little bit clearer when it starts doing that. There's several idiots on our side, and I know you know who I'm referring to. They like to say, well, Billy Lovelady said he was standing on the third step, and then a couple years later he said he was on the top step, and then a couple years later he said he was sitting down out there eating lunch. Now, do you think when Billy Lovelady was standing on them steps out front, he was even remotely aware of what stair he was standing on? And would he be relied upon years and years later to recall exactly what step he was standing on when the shots rang out? It's idiotic. What these people try to put forth. I'm sure he didn't know. And I'm sure he moved. How when you're on the stairs and you're standing there for a while and you're watching something or waiting for a parade, you're going to move. You're not a statue. You're going to go up a step, down a step. You might sit down for a minute. You might get back up. You might step up another step to get a better view. Or something to that effect. It's not so cut and dry.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I know exactly who you're talking about there, but it is Billy Lovelady. I don't know how these people don't register it, but yeah, very good point. They're not statues. They're moving. Maybe they're eating their lunch. Maybe they're drinking a cup of coffee, shaking somebody's hand.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all their own movement. And so now, we talked about. Well, I'm going to throw Wesley Frazier in here a little bit.
Okay.
And I'm sure you watched his Sixth Floor Museum interview right there.
Sure
the
did.
last one, what it was, a year or so ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I found that kind of compelling, and I think you brought that up, where he makes a statement, somewhere about 35 minutes into that video, that he thought Oswald left out the back door loading dock area. You recall that, Rob?
I do, yes.
Yeah. I thought that was pretty interesting. That's what I'm kind of very interested in hearing. I mean, that just kind of throws a different light on things, right?
Well, I'm thinking that he also said, but I might have been thinking of a different instance, but I thought in the Sixth Floor oral history, I thought that he said he was standing out front when Oswald left the building, and he sat there and he watched him cross Houston Street and turn the corner on Main Street and disappear.
Well, yeah, I just watched that again yesterday. He was there on the first step, but he moved down to the corner of Elm and Houston, near there, and said he was talking to somebody. It was a lady, and out the corner of his eye, he saw Oswald walking down Houston.
Gotcha.
So he had moved from the front door to near the corner. I don't know where. He's sitting on the corner or near it, but and that's where he saw Oswald walking down Houston, cross over to Elm, and then on up Elm, and he lost track of him there in the crowd.
Steve, that right there is my unreliable witness testimony.
Yeah.
I thought I heard something, but it was different, and that's just a small example of how small things can get twisted very, impactfully.
Yeah, but I think that's just a minor point. But anyway, it's just, I thought that was kind of interesting,
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah, now Oswald had, of course, told the police when they interrogated him, he went out the front door.
Yeah.
And also you have this instance where he was pointing somebody to the telephone. I think he called him a Secret Service man or whatever, but a guy with a crew cut, which would have been either Pierce Allman or Robin McNeil.
Right.
So now you got that little thing going on there too. So that kind of, did he just lie and said I went out the front door? But it kind of makes sense, Rob, because there's really no photograph. Nobody from the Texas School Book Depository saw him out in front. And if I was an assassin, I sure would be walking out the front door and a bunch of police, you know.
Oh, no doubt. Try to get out the back door.
Yeah, so, you know, that's something I'm digging into, but that's an interesting twist. So, yeah, you're right. The story is ever evolving, and I can tell you another thing. There are people in Dallas that saw things that just never wanted to get involved.
Yep.
And they were just scared out of their mind. They thought they were you didn't know what was going on, so holy smokes, they just shut up and didn't say a damn thing, you know.
Yep, especially after Ruby shot Oswald, and they was like, okay, I'm not saying nothing.
Yeah, that really put the fear of God in them, you know, what's going on here, so you have that factor too working there, so, you know, it's a good point. Researchers have to look into that, and I know I've talked to a few people offline there that saw Oswald down there on Jefferson. In fact, I talked to a man that was his dad he owned the Harris Motors down there on Jefferson and Patton.
Right.
And his kid, he said he says a kid, they were standing out there. It's the same. I think it's the same place Ted Calloway worked, but they were standing out there on the parking lot there, and here comes this man with a gun and a pistol in his hand, and running by, and his dad, he told me his dad got him and his sister and told him to go back inside the office and get the hell out of the way. And I said, well, do you recall what this guy looked like? He said, oh yeah, he was wearing a tan jacket. And it was Oswald. And I said, well, yeah. I mean, so there's all kinds of little stories like that out there that, you know, researchers need to dig into. You know?
Yeah. Or was it Larry Crayford? You know?
Oh, no.
But hey, Steve. Hey, man, we're running out of time on this one, brother, and I wish I could talk to you all day because I'm loving it. And I hope you would definitely come back on the show and we could talk sometime in the very near future.
Sure. We can go into a lot of things, and I appreciate the invite. It's very, very helpful, and I appreciate you listening.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for coming on. And you know, I wanted to talk to you about the package. We didn't have time today that we were looking at. So, yeah, man, in a couple weeks, I'd love to have you come back on. We can get into the package. We can get into all kinds of other stuff. And I really appreciate you coming on, Steve.
Okay, Rob, thank you very much. We'll talk soon, huh?
All right, you hang on the line for me, Steve. I'm going to talk us out here. This has been the Lone Gunman Podcast. This is Rob Clark. This son of a bitch is in the can, beamed up to the satellite down directly to your ears, people. This is me thanking Steve for stopping by. Hope you enjoyed the show. Check out tlgpodcast.com for more. Stay tuned. Peace.
Okay, Rob. Very good. Good discussion.